If people do have an estate plan, which we're saying it's the best thing to do, I would imagine, to create a plan just in case something happens to their mother or father or whoever or themselves. What happens or when people go through probate? I
Mhm.
know it's a challenging, I see it very often because it's the type of real estate that I deal with.
Sure.
Um, what would you tell families to avoid going through probate? And it doesn't have to be that they own a high amount of assets, right?
Yeah.
They can own one house or a couple of houses. Do you have any advice for those type of families?
So let's deal with what to expect, because
Yes.
that's a single question.
Yes.
What to expect during probate? It's a court process. The judge is there to make sure that someone's financial affairs are correctly closed. It's almost like closing a business, where you have a manager who in the court is called an executor or a representative or an administrator.
Yes.
And that person is responsible for taking possession of all of the deceased person's assets. It's called gathering or marshaling. Then they have to inventory or list them and value them. Then they have to notify all the creditors, including Medi-Cal, that that person has passed away. They have to pay valid creditors. And then we have this weird situation where we go into a big black box. Black box, by what I mean, is that we never know what sort of things are coming up in a probate because it's dealing with someone's former personal life. I've seen probates where we had to sue people because of defamation. I've seen probates where we had to deal with lawsuits between siblings. I've seen probates where we had to continue a divorce case where someone was dividing assets.
Wow.
I've seen probates where we have to deal with the IRS, with the Franchise Tax Board. All of those cases, most of them can be completely avoided because someone could have made advanced decisions. But the end of the probate is distribution. And so most of the time when people are a beneficiary, they want to know how much am I getting and when am I getting it.
Right.
And that will take somewhere between 2 and 3 years, often, or longer. The longest probate, to my understanding, was in Louisiana, and it lasted 55 years.
55 years.
It was an argument between an estate and a city where it was bad wills.
Wow.
One person wrote a will with a lawyer, and then he wrote his own will. And we were fighting over which will was valid. And maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but the fight went on for 55 years because it was over a bunch of property.
That's a long time.
There's actually the probate of Prince, the artist
I
formerly
heard
known
about
as
that,
Prince.
yeah.
Yeah, he died about 8 years ago, and the last lawsuit between the siblings was filed April 2024. It's still ongoing. They're still fighting.
Right. I actually saw, it was such a crazy situation. We were selling a property and I think it was Tracy, and we were about to close and someone put a lien on the property. It turns out he had another partner, another woman that he was with in the past, and it came out they had a child and so many things came out, and the wife was super upset because we couldn't sell the property anymore. There was a lien on the house. I think till this day they haven't sold the property. And they're still dealing with the probate now, the civil lawsuit. So it's this thing that just keeps on going.
So one thing that you mentioned is you have to sell the house. And in a trust, selling a house is actually not so difficult.
Right.
The trustee or the person who's in charge of the trust at any one point takes possession of the home, and then they can sell it normally.
Yes.
But in a probate, you have a lot of limitations because you're under court supervision.
Yeah.
And the judge is in charge, not the executor, not the will, the judge is in charge. And so the judge has requirements. It must be an as-is sale, meaning that the probate cannot pay for repairs. You can't pay for termite damage. You can't pay for solar panels. You just have to lower the cost.
Yeah.
That's a problem, right? That actually lowers the value of the house much more than the cost of the repair, because now you can't use the bank loan to pay for the repair.
Exactly.
Right? Second problem with the probate is that each beneficiary must agree to the sale. There's something called a notice of action that is required.
Right.
So the executor either has to ask the court for permission to sell, which is a big problem in itself, or has to ask the beneficiaries, and some beneficiaries just might not agree. Now you have to go back to court. So I've been in probates where we had to deal with 6 different notices of action in a row. And the attorney charges hourly.
Right.
So for that action, so not only do we have to pay high probate fees, but we had to pay $6,000 to sell the house, which is a lot more money than you would have to pay to any other lawyer, because we had to re-notice 6 separate times, and it delayed everything.
Yeah.
It took them 18 months to sell that house.
Wow.
Because of all the probate issues. There was nothing else that we could do.